Welcome back to The Circle, the podcast where we go all in on men's work, embodiment practices, and personal growth from our queer perspective. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Today we're joined by Mr. R, a rigor, dominant, and bondage educator dedicated to building community through educational and artistic experiences with bondage, kink, BDSM, and engaging classes. We'll explore the crucial role of communication and consent in BDSM and talk about how clear, ongoing communication builds trust, ensures safety, and fosters deeper connections in and out of a scene. Tim, Mr. R, are you ready to go all in?
I am.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, first of all, welcome, Mr. R. We're so glad that you could join us here today.
Thanks. Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Yeah. Where are you dialing in from?
I'm joining you guys from Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Hi, Cambridge. So before we fully dive into today's conversation, I just want to take a moment to check in with Tim. How familiar are you with the terms that I mentioned in the opener? Rigor, dominant, BDSM, just to make sure we're all kind of playing in the same world here before we go fully in.
Some of those words I feel very familiar with. BDSM I have seen, but do I have a deep understanding? I would say probably not. Dominant, I have heard, it's probably the term I'm most familiar with. And then rigor, I have a sense of what that is, but I would like to know more. And like my sense is that's what we would refer to, in Broadway shows when we would repel. Mm-hmm. Like in The Pirate Queen, we would do a lot of like repelling, and we would. That's the thing we did. Because, we were like supposed to be pirates on Broadway, and so we were like swinging. So I'm assuming it's a similar way of setting up and safety and things, but I'm eager to learn what it means in this context.
Okay. Well, why don't we start there, Mr. R, and we'll just kind of do a lay of the land for all of our listeners.
Yeah, so I use those terms in part to recognize that not every encounter which involves rope involves a power exchange. So it isn't always about being a dominant or finding a submissive. Sometimes it's more friendly. And so I think a lot of rope play can come out of community, can come out of friendship, can come out of sensation play. And so I use this term rigor to identify both that I do suspension with rope, which involves rope on the body and moving the body through 3D space, which includes hanging and using gravity as a force downward. And I also use it to recognize that I'm not always playing the role of a dominant, that I'm not always using power dynamics in the kind of play that I like to play with.
So with that explanation, it does sound like, the rigging that you were used to in Broadway is probably pretty similar then. So there's, some sort of attachment and some sort of rope or mechanism to keep people into a position, and there is an element of safety also involved there.
Yes, I would say in my experience, there was always someone who was an expert in what they were doing, and the people who were being trained to work with these apparatuses in whatever way. So on one show we did bungee cords, and in swing the girls were in bungee cords, and so we would kind of throw them. It was almost as if like, what would swing dancing look like if there were no gravity? And then in the Pirate Queen, it was more like rope, because we were like rappelling down from a ship, and there was very clear procedures and rules, and there was one person who was responsible for that. So they had the final word on how it all went and if we were ready to do it or not. And safety was always the number one thing for me. And in that circumstance, it was always, as soon as safety was questioned, everything stopped, including sometimes the show, where like the stage manager would be like, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have to have a pause, and they put the curtain down and make sure everyone is safe.
Yeah, and on that topic, Mr. R, I've been in one of your workshops in the past, and I had an incredible experience being there. And what I recall and remember so much about it wasn't about the skills that I learned with rope. It was about the structure of the container that you set, the safety that you so eloquently talked about. You brought us through several slides on communication, negotiation, consent, and really this safety building. So I would love to start there and ask you about the importance of all of this before we even get into the acts themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I structure my classes that way because my feeling is like that's the thing that I want you to take away. That's the meat and potatoes of all of it. Like if you leave and you don't ever play with rope again, the thing that I think is most important is recognizing how we manage risk together, how we hold space with one another, um, how we talk about the risks that we're undertaking, because nothing is risk free, right? Like we drive in a car, we I don't know, have grinder hookups. And there are risks involved in all of that. And there are different risks, of course, but the risk management and like the clear, open willingness to communicate, I think is the thing that I want people to take away. And is also a thing that I think is really lacking in a lot of the sex education that many of us had, that many of us experienced. As I guess I had my sex education in like junior high and high school, and then it was sort of like over. Which is also weird to think that it isn't ongoing, and that this kind of conversation about consent can happen much younger, and that it can't. I don't know that there is like the meat and potatoes, which is often the putting something inside of something, and that there's no wider conversation about why we do this thing and what varieties we might encounter and how we center our pleasure in the practice, because it's, I don't know, somehow that seems like superfluous, just crazy to me.
Yeah, I really appreciate the emphasis on safety and the admission of risk, right? It's the exposing that in any situation that we're partaking in, especially in the realm of sex, sexuality, and then into kink and BDSM, there will always be an element of risk. There is something there. And I think the pure acknowledgement of that and the vocalization of that is so powerful. And then working through the shared understanding of the risks that we're assuming and then going into, do you consent to this, is so powerful. So could I hear from you your definition of consent, and can we educate the audience about what it is we're talking about when we talk about consent?
Well, I want to backtrack just for a minute.
Of course.
About something which is about risk. And that is that this thing is really risky and it's really dangerous and potentially life-threatening. But this thing is really risky. You know, like it's that's kind of the fun of it. And so to ignore that is also to like lose some part of what it is that I think is actually really thrilling and allows us to step outside of our normal everyday. I mean, I'm here in my corporate cosplay, as I said at the beginning, and to like step out of this and to inhabit that world of risk is really fun, and can build a lot of trust and can I don't know, just give you a kind of playfulness that sometimes is missing as adults.
So I'm going to jump in, maybe the beginner question, but you just sort of spoke to this thing is really risky, and then you repeated it with a smile, right? So it's like, it's a thing we need to be aware of, but also a delicious part of it. But what are you talking about? Meaning, like, what is this thing? Is it the relationship that's really risky? Is it the working with rope in particular? Is it the suspension part of it? Like, I mean, I'm coming in with almost no understanding. I assume some of the listeners are also. So what do you mean if you could go a little deeper with that?
Yeah. One of the things, or like to draw an analogy, when you're like going for a hookup and you have those like little butterflies in your stomach and you're like kind of excited, but it's also like, I don't know, you're like, oh my gosh, is this person going to murder me in their basement? Or are we going to have like really great sex? That is kind of this element of like, ooh, it's like kind of risky. It's kind of like a little bit dangerous. And it also feels maybe like a little bit wrong. And that's what the spice of it is. That's the thing that makes it like, gives brain tingles, I guess. And the like the butterflies. And sometimes when those butterflies are gone, it can be hard to be like, oh, that like I am excited to like do that thing that I don't actually feel nervous about. So it's like a re-injection of that maybe nervous energy or that like anxiousness, which can also be a flip side of a coin to excitement.
there's an inherent risk in many of the acts that we do. And then when we introduce BDSM and kink, we're introducing more risk. And the risk that can be introduced here is the risk for greater physical and psychological harm. Right? Because we're starting to go deeper and into darker crevices and in things that on the surface could seem taboo, could seem wrong. And so there is more inherent risk than, let's say, just a grinder hookup. But even that grinder hookup, even if it's just, hey, we've agreed that this is what we're going to do. If you've never met that person before, there is still risk there, right? And now if we're introducing something that is like we're agreeing that we're going to play with rope, for example, now we have additional risk that we have to communicate and we have to talk through, and we have to build an agreement and consensus on of like how much we're going to play, how are we going to play, and starting to create structures and boundaries around that. Because the act of rope, let's just stay with rope for a moment here, can be dangerous.
Yeah, rope can cause nerve damage. Rope can cause bodily harm. There's carryover effects where if you're tied up and there's a fire. And so thinking through those things together with a partner and how you want to manage those risks. And also each tie and each way that you put rope on the body carries different amounts of potential harm to that person. And like some ties are escapable and are much more like a suggestion that one is captured versus another situation in which you like are fully tied up and you could not escape unless the other person helps you out. Those things involve different amounts of risk, different amounts of trust, different amounts of, I don't know, just like a little bit of excitement, but also nervousness. And the things that we have been told are wrong are often the thing that we're sort of playing with, this like taboo element of like, it's bad to kidnap someone. But now you have someone who says to you, I want you to kidnap me.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that? How do you like make it okay, both for yourself, for the other person, and like also legally, like how do I make sure that the police don't get involved? Or
well, this is interesting to me because I'm thinking, it sounds a lot about communication, right? Which I know we're going to get into, but what if you're a person who's curious but has never been there? How does someone consent when they don't entirely know where they're going? You know, like we're taking a hike. But I actually have never done this hike before. I don't know what's coming. So I'm like, so what do you do in that situation? How do you meet that person?
yeah, so you could set up a structure for communicating during the actual play itself. You could say like, okay, well, we're going to start slow and you can tell me like when it's too much. And this is how you'll tell me when it's too much. We could maintain very clear and normal conversation. I'll regularly check in with you. You could also do it in something I call like lab work, where you're like actually just doing the thing and that there is no like anything else going on, whether it's sexual or psychological, where it's literally just like, I'm going to put rope on your body and you're going to tell me how that feels. And then I'm going to suspend you from that part on your body. And then you're going to tell me how that feels. We're going to see if that thing works and if you like it. And if you like want to come down at any moment, like we end. Like there's no pressure to keep going. There's no reason to like not enjoy this thing, because the enjoyment is the heart and soul of this whole, why we're even engaging in the risk at all.
So this is really fascinating to me because I did not know this was gonna come up, but I was an acupuncturist, or am still an acupuncturist, and my first session, specifically with someone who's never had acupuncture, is very that. It's I'm gonna talk to you about all the things I'm doing. I'm gonna tell you like, this is my finger, this is the guide tube, this is now the needle, you know, and it's a very conversational. And I will tell people, I'm like, at some point, I'm good at being really quiet, but this first session, I'm going to ask you over and over again, how are you feeling? How does this feel? How does this feel? To help them build their own vocabulary about their own physical sensations, which might be brand new to them, but also so that I'm constantly aware of how do I dose this physical medicine to you. I'm kind of shocked to hear now. It feels like a very similar thing is happening And then I have to imagine, as it is with acupuncture, each person and each dynamic then is a unique snowflake, because I have this much bandwidth for these things, or this person likes or wants more, this person needs the medium amount, and like, I guess it's like an art in finding those sweet spots, those like golden, I don't know, maybe there's a real name for it. That sweet spot. Yeah. That thing that makes everyone happy. Right. Because as the acupuncturist, I never wanted my patients to be uncomfortable. Like that was never the point, right? The point was to give you the maximum benefit to the extent that you can accept it. So there are some differences, obviously, but
yeah. And I think what would be interesting to continue to invite more people into this kind of conversation is like, there can be conversation that's happening during this kind of like lab-like, almost sterile conversation of like, we're just doing the thing and we're just checking in. There's no other things at play right now, right? And it very much is like just developing a relationship with whether it's the needle or the rope, right? Or whatever else it might be. There's kind of like this in the moment experimentation going on with an active exchange of information going back and forth, right? We're understanding where each other's experiences are. What happens though beforehand, before we actually get into a session, before we get into a scene, the communication that is happening at that point, I think also plays a really critical role before we get into the scene. So from an acupuncturist standpoint, like what are the conversations you might have with somebody who's like, hey, this is my first time with acupuncture and I have no idea what's going on. Like, what do I do?
I mean, I give them a rundown. I don't want to do the whole rundown now because I'm more interested in Mr. R's rundown, but I'm like, these are some of the most common things that most people experience and that you can kind of expect, and give them, with acupuncture, I tell people, I'm like, people think they have to come lay on the bed of nails. I'm like, that isn't what we're doing. And so reminding them the comfort, and then giving them some examples. I'd be curious to know, is it very similar?
Yeah, I mean, we will often talk through like, what do we want to get out of a scene, like, or what do we want to get out of rope? Like, why do you want to do rope? Is it that you like the physical sensation and perhaps some of the discomfort? Is you want zero discomfort? Is it about like certain positions or like looking certain ways? And is it about like rolling around on the floor together alone? Is it about being suspended? Is it about being captured? Is it about like wearing something which looks really pretty and really beautiful on your body? And then also saying like, okay, and then here are some of the concerns that come up and here's how we'll manage them. So if you, I don't know, have like patchiness on your hands, that's often a bad sign, or a sign that like something needs to change. Like patchy numbness is often related to a nerve related something. And so then I'll talk them through like what I'll do to address those problems. And if the problem doesn't go away, then we'll probably end the tie because it's not really within my risk profile to push beyond those sorts of like nummy, tingly sensations. Those things can also be really distracting in a negative way, where it's like not like, oh, it's painful and I'm processing the pain and that's kind of the point, but like it's so uncomfortable that's all I can think about is that knot which is pushing on my ankle, and I hate that and I need it to change in order for like anything else to like even be able to rise to the surface of my perception. So I'll just like talk through some of those things, or if there's specific ties I'm going to put someone in, I'm going to mention like these are the places on your body that I'm concerned about. As the rope goes on, I'm going to check in with you. Also know that it might take 5 minutes for me to get you out. So I don't want to hear from you like, get me out immediately. I mean, sure, tell me that, of course, like at the very minimum. But ideally, you're telling me like, hey, this thing is like starting to bother me. Is there something we can do about it? Because it's much easier to manage when you have a little bit more of a runway than this like, oh my God, if this goes on for 30 seconds longer, I'm going to lose my mind. Or I'm going to like lose my hand, or, so it's like that sort of setup and communication.
So this is making me think, I'm going to take a jump here. I was watching Fear Factor as like a boy in high school, and I have a terrible fear of spiders. And what they did was they put the contestant's head in like a table with like a plexiglass, whatever. And then they put, I think, like 18 tarantulas, which are like solitary creatures in together. And they were like, they said to them, that's a similar thing. They're like, it is going to take us 15 minutes to put them on, and it will take us 15 minutes to take them off. And I remember that was the moment for me where I'm like, oh, I couldn't, like, when you're like, I'm about to win $50,000, but I'm like, if I freak out, I still have to wait 15 minutes for you to, and then I was like, and they did not, I don't know they were having this conversation on air.
It goes back to just being honest about the risks that we're assuming, right? Like that transparency is so beautiful because then it gives the contestant the conscious choice to say yes. They are more aware of the risk. They cannot be aware of all of the risk. None of us can ever be aware of all of the risk. But how much transparency can we bring into the conversation so that the risks are understood? So that when we say, yes, you can put me in this box with 18 tarantulas, I understand a little bit about what I'm getting into. When I say, yes, I want you to tie me in this certain way, right? Like I'm understanding if I'm tied in this certain way, it will come with certain risk. It is going to take us 45 minutes to get into the ultimate pose. And then if it took 45 minutes to get there, it's going to take a while to undo it. Even with safety shears, it's still going to take a little bit of time to get out of it. And I think that transparency and communication is so vital to then be able to get to the point of, do you want to do this with me?
I also want to say that with regard to risk and risk profile, these are things which can change day to day. So like one day you might be like feeling really spicy and feeling really great in your body, in which case like, awesome, I'm like gonna shoot for the moon. And other days you might be like kind of sad because it was daylight savings and you're like sleepy and you're like, I don't want to deal with that today.
Rewind to me on Monday.
Right. Or it might be that with one partner, you're happy to do all kinds of things, but with a different partner, you're not. And so that's this like, you get to choose, you get to decide, you get to be influenced by how you're feeling.
Absolutely. We're allowed to change, and our trust in ourselves and in others is allowed to shift, and that trust, building up to that trust, can take time. It can also be removed very quickly. And so I do want to take a moment to talk about that trust is mutual. It goes both ways. So it's not just about in the case of acupuncture. It's not just in the case of a patient trusting you and your abilities. You also have to trust that patient that they're going to communicate to you proactively and actively during the session how they're doing.
That's totally right.
And in a rope scene, it's not just about the person being tied that has to trust the person doing the tying, right? Like the person doing the tying needs to trust the person that's being tied that like they're going to communicate to me when they're getting to these points. Because if I don't trust that they will, then I'm also not in my full experience either. So how do we get to a point where, or what are some of the things that we can do to nurture our communication, to be able to develop the safety and trust that is necessary to get into the fullest of these experiences?
One of the things that I find really helpful is similar as you were saying about acupuncture, that like developing a language together, which you both share and understand, I think is really an essential part, where you not only understand the risks, but you can talk about them similarly. This is why I think it's really nice to have both people who like to be tied and people who like to tie in a class together, because you begin to develop language around not just what the risks are, but how to describe them to one another and how to speak about them and how to request changes or how to ask for adjustments or how to express like, hey, I need like 5 minutes, or can you let my arm rest a little bit and then we can go back to this thing, or we let it rest and then maybe we don't, but I don't know. So there's that part of it. There's also the continued demonstration of care, which I think comes from listening. So the best way to ruin someone's trust is to have them ask for something that they know that you can provide and just refuse to provide it. That's a like big red flag in my book of like, if you're saying, hey, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and the person's like, no, or they just like pretend like they don't hear you, or other demonstrations of like uncaring for your expression, I think is the best way to undo trust, but also the best way to build trust is to like practice demonstrating readily that you are listening and that you're ready to receive the trust that someone is handing to you.
That need to be recognized, right? To be heard, to be seen, that it's a like a fundamental human need. And like, especially if we're going to be playing with, something that is potentially risky, like is so critical. So if I'm expressing something and I'm not being recognized, there's no validation coming back in return. Like, how can I expect to trust?
Well, so I want to pause for a second because, a men's embodiment podcast, a lot of the work that we do is meant to help people create a conversation with their own body and start to understand like sensations and whatnot. And so, in acupuncture, as the example, I would ask people, to try to describe their sensations. And I would say, could you avoid words like good, hurts, pain, fine? I said, because not that they're wrong, but they don't really tell me a lot. I'm like, so I'm going to ask you to something like, oh, it burns, it itches, it's tight, it's pulling, those sorts of things. And the more a person is capable of doing that, the greater I am able to meet them in a way that I think gives them the greatest benefit. So I'm curious, have you also noticed that? And if so, how do you bring people into a greater sensational understanding so that they can meet you by saying, not just it hurts, but, oh, it's a pull versus like a brush burn versus, because I feel like there's lots of things to be like, depending on what it is, you might have a different solution.
Yeah. One of the things that comes up about this is like you're tied in a position where you're also sort of twisted, and my body is different than your body. And you're saying my right arm has this pain. And I'm like, which one's your right arm? Like, is it, so one of the tools I use is to like actually touch and be like, is it this arm or is it that arm? Like, okay, great. So, and then is it like running my hand along their arm? Is it up here? Is it down here? Like, where is this thing? Is it on the front? Is it on the back? Like actually like providing that input to that person, not only gives them the ability to be like, yes, no, sort of like the eye doctor where they're like, is it one or is it two? That's a way easier decision than like, is this thing clear? Like, yeah, it seems clear, but like, is this one clear or is that one clear? Is a much better way to have that conversation. So to like give the physical input of like where on which arm is it? And then they might even be like, oh, it's actually not on my arm. I think it's on my chest. And then you'll like touch the body and try to find what that thing is and wait for them to affirmatively be like, oh, it's there. Like change that.
So I'm hearing you say tactile aid is one primary way that you help people build the sensational vocabulary.
Yeah. And then the other one, I think, is through experience, because there's all kinds of ways that rope can be painful. And like bad painful, not like good painful. Or, I mean, these things, there's sort of a porous boundary between some of these. One of them is when rope slides on the skin, it can be shearing, and that sucks a lot. And the shearing can come from it like sliding like along a limb, or it can come from something which is rotating. So if your body is sort of like twisted and something is rotating against the skin, that can be really uncomfortable. Some of the discomfort can also come from something which is too tight, or it can be poorly placed. So some places on our body, like I'm thinking specifically about the upper arms, there are places where just like little tiny differences make a whole world of change. And so again, like checking in to find out which band on the arm is the one that's uncomfortable, and then adjusting that one like ever so slightly up or ever so slightly down. There's also ways, like rope is a fairly dynamic element. So you can like pull the rope and push the body away from to like create a little bit of space, and it like shifts the pressure point of that rope so that now there's like a little bit more breathing room on one side than the other side. And sometimes that will solve a problem.
And I love hearing about how we could get to solving that problem together, and the opening up of our internal experience to somebody else, right? Being able to communicate and be in this this conversation with another person to help them understand, oh, I'm experiencing pain somewhere, and it's not a pleasant pain, because sometimes it can be a pleasant pain if we're talking about BDSM. Like that may be something that I'm actively seeking. Like this is now getting to the territory of discomfort and something that I'm wanting to change. And so I'm letting you in on my internal experience, and you're bringing in your curiosity to help to reveal that. And so that is a very vulnerable and intimate act itself of communication, of like, I'm trying to help bring you into my inner world, and like I'm allowing you to be there to then get to a place where we can fix this together.
Another place where this comes up is not strictly sensational, but is also psychological, where people, I find, don't have great vocabulary to describe why they like doing the things that they like doing. So, for example, oftentimes people are like, "Oh, I'm submissive," or "Oh, I'm dominant." Okay, great, but like, in what way? Like, say more about the motivations that draw you to that thing, and how that thing is expressed or impressed on each person. So, like, are you more service oriented? Do you like having people do acts of service for you? Are you more control oriented? Is it that I don't know, you like being objectified, right? Like there are different facets to submission and to domination, which can also lend. What I like about building that language is that it provides for avenues of exploration. So it isn't just that this person is going to like let me do whatever I want to them, because that is kind of boring. I think I want to be able to like find those little boundary conditions and kind of like exert some friction against them, and to like figure out what the buttons are. Like, how do I push the right buttons? And when you have that language, you can negotiate for that thing up front, and it can lead to a better match. And it can also lead to the decision that like, yeah, actually, I don't think we have enough overlap to do this. Like my interest actually isn't there. So I'm glad we talked, and I'm glad that we didn't harm each other, and I'm glad we didn't waste each other's time. And I'm gonna go. I like learned a great bit about you, and you learned some about me, and that's where this ends.
You know, it's fascinating. I do think that we would benefit as a culture from a more robust conversation about these things. The thing that's popping up for me was that, you know, as a professional dancer, I was used to a very particular kind of teacher, which was a very demanding sort of more sort of thing. And I felt that same thing in some of the sports that I would play. And so when I was in my early 30s at this gym in New York City, I would interact with people, you know, in that way. And some people really loved it because they were on the same page. It's sort of like hard-nosed, like every workout's a competition, and we're kind of jabbing each other in a friendly way. And then I learned, I'm like, some people really hated it. And I remember the first time discovering that and being like, oh, I wasn't trying to be a dick. I thought we were having fun. And then recognizing, oh, well, the definition of fun is really different and like contextual. But then there was never a conversation. It sounds like the world we're discussing now is maybe one of the beginnings of the conversation about that, and like where you can sort of understand like these aspects of ourselves. So I think there's a lot that I still don't know in this particular realm, but like how exciting it could be to decide, oh, well, I really liked it when I had a demanding yoga teacher or dance teacher that I then sort of satisfied by working harder. I wonder what that means, right? You know, like, and I have that discovery. So I guess I'm saying this for probably every person listening. You might be able to discover these parts of your life where like, oh, these dynamics have existed or currently exist, and we might benefit from having a nuanced understanding, even if it's just beginning with a nice exploration. Now, how do we start that? I'm going to leave to you two.
It's conversation, right? It's like exactly what we've kind of been circling around is like, what would feel good to you? And what would be fun to you? And what does care look like to you? and not allowing our perceptions of what those things could be to influence somebody else's. I think we've shared this on the podcast before. Like there's different ways that people receive care, right? And so, like in a BDSM context, care could be impact. It could be a spanking. Care could be, I'm going to tie you up and pretend like I'm kidnapping you right now. And from the outside, that could look really scary. That could look really bad. That could look like, oh, you don't care about that person at all. When, if done in a really safe container and in a trusting, loving way, is actually one of the most ultimate forms of care. I was actually at a party recently for Snowbound Leather Weekend, and like many of the gay leather parties, I sometimes get a little bored with them because what ends up happening in a lot of these spaces, and it's no critique to the people having these acts, it's just not my type of act, is it's a lot of sex. It's a lot of fornication, anal sex, oral sex, and I'm just like, I can get a blowjob anywhere, right? Like this isn't interesting to me. It really isn't. But what was interesting was the mommy and her slave that walked in, and slave accidentally spilled something on mommy's boots and had to get down and lick them up. Yeah, I see your face right now. I'm like, now I'm interested. And I also, in that scene that I was witnessing, I saw the most gentle, loving, caring affection coming from that mommy.
Is that what interested you?
Yeah.
Like, take a moment. That was the thing more than anything. Was like this deep, like consensual care and shared dynamic. That's what fascinated you.
Yes, it was. I was like, but I mean, the thing that caught my interest was the act. And then upon studying it, I was like, oh, there is something way more going on here.
So just to go back to your example then, with some of the other things that were happening at that party that you mentioned, I was at that party with you. Is it that you feel like the other things were a little more transactional and therefore less intentional, less communicated?
Yeah, that's definitely how I'm going to interpret it, is that it felt more transactional, didn't have that same level of care, of like love involved, and maybe not as much communication. There maybe have been plenty of nonverbal communication, but I don't know how much like verbal communication was going around of like, hey, here are my likes, dislikes, limits, and hard offs, right? Like, and here's my safe word, right? There wasn't that, a lot of that kind of conversation going on where again, kind of welcoming people into the internal environment, right? Welcoming people into what is happening inside of me starts to create a vulnerability within myself. And that to me then allows for deep caring and deep nurturing.
One of the things that I want to bring up in this space, especially as we talk about communication and asking for what we want and expressing how it's going, is to recognize the role of shame and how we have all learned, especially if we're in any space where we're perceived different or weird or freakish or somehow what we do is non-normative, that shame has a real silencing effect. It can be really hard to say, I want you to kidnap me. It'd be really hard to say, I want you to call me your slave. And what that means to me is, it can be really hard to like fully inhabit that thing, which everyone is like, oh, you're weird, like that. That when you do inhabit that and you find others you can inhabit that with, and you feel like so fully seen in what it is that you have imagined and wanted and needed, that becomes really magical. Like it really becomes, to me, a source of community, that we can all hold space for each other's weirdness and the things which have been wrong with us for so long, and the things that like we are kind of afraid to show other people who don't understand what the space is that we cultivate together, that we can show up in a fullness that often we don't carry with us. I mean, me here in my like corporate cosplay, right? I don't bring this side of me out in work, even though at work they're like, oh, you know, we like want everyone to be their whole self. I'm like, sure, but like I don't think you're ready for that.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting what you're saying, because in the spiritual personal growth world and the men's work world and all of this understanding of what you want is a really powerful question that a lot of people don't really know. And one of the things I feel like I'm hearing you say, which is exciting to me, it feels healing, is creating a safe space into which I could try something so I can discover if I like it or not. I know I will tell you this example. There was a person in New York City that wanted me to play with like some humiliation. I had never done that. And luckily I had the safe space to like kind of do that. It turns out that isn't my heart's calling, but I was able to have a moment and an experience where I could try that. I think that's so important, because otherwise it's like we can get stopped in the, well, I don't know, right? Like I don't know. Well, how can I know? It's a little bit like going, well, I don't know if this is the right analogy, but going to the ice cream shop. And you're like, oh, I haven't tasted that flavor. Well, I won't know if I like it probably until I taste it. I don't need to have a whole cone, maybe. So they have a little sample. This is like I'm turning this into ice cream. Yeah. No, but you take a sample and you decide like, and I think we need that in like lots of areas of our life. And this sounds like one of them. So, oh, maybe I try something and then I discover, oh, I actually really like that. Or maybe I don't really like that. Or I want a different flavor of that. But, you know, and so I think that freedom to explore seems really important in this world, but also it seems really important everywhere. To me, at least.
Yeah, and I also want to say that in this space, there's often people who have known these things about themselves forever. I don't like my tying partner shared that when he saw the Jungle Book and Khan wraps up, is it Khan? No, the snake like wraps up one of the characters that he was like 6 or 7. I was like, oh, that's like, I don't know what this feeling is, but that is, oh, that's something. Or when Aladdin gets tied up and put inside that burlap sack and then thrown into the water, which is like a horrifying moment in Aladdin. But that he was like, oh, I have such conflicting feelings about this thing. And that then maybe as a child, you don't know because you haven't learned shame yet. You say something about, ooh, wasn't that tantalizing or exciting? And people are like, ew, no, what? No, absolutely not. That was wrong. That was a bad thing that happened to Aladdin. You should always think that's a bad thing. And then you're like, oh, these are cards that I should hold really close to myself. And we start to put up these like little guardrails that protect us from the world which wants to make us all normal. And I think that many of us are much less normal than we think we are. I mean, there are plenty of normal people, and those people kind of freak me out. I will not lie. When I find myself in a room where like everyone is making a lot of eye contact and everyone is like really just like normal communication, I'm like, I don't get what's going on here, guys. This is like really strange to me. Where are my freaks and geeks at? And so that's where this, like, it isn't just about finding this for yourself. It isn't just about like sampling and tasting, but it's often about like actually building space to do the thing that you've always wanted and known, but have also always equally been told is wrong.
So I first of all want to say so much about that I love. First, I want to say the word normal has always been sort of a bad word for me because I'm like, I don't understand why that's something I would want to strive for, you know, uniqueness, authenticity, or things I want to strive for, but like normalcy feels like not that. But the other thing I think I'm hearing is like we have this really black and white thinking, or our culture can tend towards very black and white. This is good, this is bad. And I think it's the saying, you know, the difference between a medicine and a poison is the dosage. And I think this having a nuanced perspective of, well, I don't remember the scene in Aladdin, although I do love that movie and a lot of the music. I don't remember the scene, but you're like, oh, well, maybe there are ways of restraining people that are like bad, but it can exist on a spectrum, like so much of men's work, right? And to be like, oh, there are other ways in context that are not necessarily that, and allowing there to be more than just yes, no, black, white, red, green, and existing then in a world where, oh, I can have a conversation that allows this to be present, that isn't that image that you have. I think that's an important part of what we're doing, this conversation, and I think we need more of it.
And there's something too about like starting to shift the mindset. I love the idea of poison versus medicine is based off of the dosage. That dosage is also dependent on the person, right? But when we try to normalize everyone and we try to make everyone the same, we try to say this is the dosage that is for everybody. When the truth is, right, like I may enjoy something that's closer to what somebody else might perceive as poison or what could be poison to them, right? Or I might only have a tolerance for less of that medicine actually is getting me close to poison, while that could be the dosage that somebody else might need, right? So it's just allowing that each of us are individuals and that we each have different things that can be healing or damaging to us.
Yeah, humiliation comes in all forms and colors, whether it's like small penis humiliation or if it's, I don't know, using the F slur, if it's calling someone fat or it's making fun of their body, or it's calling them stupid, or it's making fun of the way they dress. I don't know. These things all have different like facets to them. And what I think is funny, or not funny, the like surprising and potentially ironic thing about humiliation play is it's often empowering. It's often empowering to the person who you're like calling these names to, because it helps them feel seen. And it helps them feel seen for the things that everyone else thinks they're less than. And so in some way there's like this humiliation thing which is running through all of this, which is the seeing and making a moment out of the things which we've often hidden from each other. But that, I guess I find it ironic because so often the humiliation thing is perceived as like degrading and it is that, but it is also a sense of empowerment that like now you get to recapture and play with these things that have so long been off limits.
Right. It's deeply caring. Like that person is receiving it as care, even from the outside world, it may not seem that way, but that person is receiving it as love and care and attention.
Yeah. My friend works in Findom, and she explained, and because I know her so well and like how caring, and she gave me that insight for the first time about the service that it really was. And she would do some humiliation stuff, and my eyes were opened up to, oh, there's real value and balance. She would sometimes speak, about what it was they were wanting. You're like, oh, this is a way of balancing out your life experience, right? Which I really related to from like a yogic perspective or an acupuncture perspective. You'd be like, oh, balance is really super important. Ayurvedic, like balance is good, right? And like, so let's try to create that in all the ways that we can.
You were going to, was that the story you were going to share?
No, I'm going to share. Okay, I'm going to share another story. So, okay, so I was, when I was still living in New York City, I was creating a special excursion for my now ex-husband. And I struggle with claustrophobia, and I took him to the city, the Skywalk, or it's where you walk on the outside of a skyscraper in Hudson Yards. Do you know this? Okay.
Right,
anyway, yeah. So
yes.
I took him to this thing, and I was like, this was a big surprise. I was like, this is going to be great. And they put us in these jumpsuits, and then they put us in these harnesses, and my claustrophobia starts like really flaring up, because I'm like, I know, and it's designed this way. You cannot get out of your harness until they let you out. And then clip you into this railing. And once you're in the railing, you can't go backwards either. And I remember standing there and I was like, oh my God, this was my idea.
I said yes to this.
I said yes to this. I like did a whole surprise around it. I paid for it. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And like, I did end up doing it. I was at the back of the team. I was like, Tim, you cannot freak out and then force everyone to run through this course. But it's like, now I think in the context of this conversation, I could start to bring that, right? To be like, okay, well, I struggle with a little claustrophobia. Where can we start? So there's power in knowing it. And then I suspect power in someone who's like, okay, well, I've been here before. I think if someone explained, oh, here's a knot that you could get out of. Oh, okay. Let's maybe start there. I mean, but am I hearing you correctly? Is that like something a conversation that might happen?
Yeah. And it also, like, not all rope is bondage. Like, sometimes it's about like feeling a tightness on the body. And so like you can design ties which are tight to the body, but the body is still free to move. Or that you can do a tie which just captures the knee, for example. So you like still have full range of motion at your hip. And maybe you just tie one leg, so you have this like kind of wonky, jaunty like motion that you are able to do, but like not fully walk. And so there, I mean, it comes in degrees, and you can sort of like titrate the amount that you give or receive based on what each person likes and wants.
Yeah, titration. Back to the exactly. It sounds beautiful, and it sounds like it allows for an ongoing exploratory journey, and how great that is, right?
One of the things we mentioned earlier was kind of giving people the heads up of like, it's going to take this long to get into it and this long to get out of it. In the New York City experience of the walking on the skyscraper, did they give you knowledge about how long it would take to get the harness on and how long it would take for them to get it off?
I thought no, they didn't. They did an excellent job, but I didn't even know I was going to be wearing a harness. I thought I'd have like a belt with like a carabiner clip. No, which now that I think about it is like, okay, you know, of course they're not going to let me be able to unlatch, but no, there wasn't any of that. And I remember even though I had an unbelievably fun time, I still felt relief when they started peeling me out of the harness.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious though, like, you know, as somebody that has been tied, right, and has gone through the experience of like being educated about like, hey, it's going to take me about this long to get you into it. It might take this long to get out of it. Here are some of the protocols, right? Like, it helped me to rest in something that I wasn't super confident in at first. So I'm curious, like, if they had taken the time to explain these things to you, to welcome you into the experience a little bit more, do you think it would have helped ease a little bit of that?
Absolutely. And I feel compelled to say they did a great job. Yeah. All of their education was about how we're not going to fall off this skyscraper, which I think is most people's primary concern. And I think they were like less like about the claustrophobia. Because the thing is, I could have run a marathon in this outfit. I just could not have taken it off, you know. But yes, knowing that would have been really helpful.
So they were helping to help ease your nerves around some of the risk that was involved in this. I mean, the big risk, which is like you could fall off the side of this building, right? So we're going to educate you about how we're mitigating that. But there were other risks that they may not have been cluing you into.
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
That's fair. Mr. R, I have one last topic to explore with you, and that is how we can translate the robust communication that we learn in our BDSM and kink play, and how do we translate that into our everyday lives? And so I want to just first and foremost congratulate you on your recent marriage.
Oh,
thank you.
Congratulations.
And how have you, over the course of your years in relationship, been able to use what you've learned through BDSM and kink and developing these communication tools? How have you been able to incorporate them into your intimate personal relationships?
Yeah, one of the big things that I take out of this experience is taking a minute or like building a ritual around communicating with one another, setting aside a time where you're going to check in, And you might even be like, okay, I feel totally crazy. I know this is crazy, but I'm experiencing jealousy about whatever this, and I know that it's mine. I know that I'm the one who has to deal with this, but it's going to help me to tell you. And I don't really expect you to do anything with it, but I need to just like let it out, and I need you to hear it, and building trust that like I'm going to say some things that like I even know are kind of crazy. And I'm using crazy here to be like, I know that it's whatever, that maybe you'll perceive that I'm blaming you, or maybe this is not the way that I normally feel, and yet I still feel this way. But like also in order for me to manage, I have to say it. I'm going to say it, and I hope that you just listen and receive it. And I know that I don't want you to change. I don't want you to like act any differently. I don't think this is your fault, but something about me just giving the words to this is going to help. And then also that perhaps you'll identify that this, in this circumstance, the jealousy is actually rooted in some need that I have that we can work together on solving. So if I'm like feeling uncomfortable about you with another partner, and I'm feeling jealous about this person, the need is like, well, I actually need you to just like reassure me that I'm still important to you. Even though like I know that I'm still important to you, but like I just want you to say it. Or setting aside time to be like, oh, we're gonna like do this thing. I don't know, we're gonna cook a meal, or we're gonna have friends over. You seem like a little bit anxious about that. Like what's going on? I'm like, well, I just don't want my friends to think X, Y, and Z about the way we live or whatever. And so I think that ritual is really helpful. And then through that ritual, practicing listening and not bringing those things up in the future, not like throwing it back at someone, right? So like holding space for it in that moment and allowing it to kind of wash away, to go away, to dissipate, because that's kind of the goal of sharing is like, I'm going to like let this out of me, and I don't want it to go into you. I actually just want it to just like float away forever. But for some reason, I don't know why, but like as a human being, it's nice for someone else to witness that thing happen. So what have I said? The ritual part of it, the like speaking to whatever the feeling is that you're having, and even identifying that like you don't expect anything of your saying this. And then the other thing is to recognize that like your wants and needs are different from someone else's. And maybe I'm going down like a little bit of a polyamory rabbit hole here, but like my wants and needs are different than your wants and needs. And my expression of those wants and needs, which you don't have or match, is not a judgment. It is something genuine of myself, and that you can demonstrate caring for me by allowing me to experience and to seek and to find an expression of those wants and needs, regardless of your involvement in those wants and needs.
It's really, really beautifully said. And I heard a lot about being in a trusting relationship, to be able to be seen, to be heard, to be recognized, to be held with compassion, and to have that be mutually given, right? And kind of this dance that goes on between the emotions between two people or more people. And I think that it's really beautifully connected to a lot of what we discussed within BDSM and Kink, right? It's allowing people inside of our experience. It's being vulnerable to share what it is we might be wanting, what it is we might be needing in certain circumstances, and trusting that somebody else can hold that with us and play with it with us and allow it to be, expressed out of us, so that it's not held by ourselves or held by the other person. We can kind of be in this dynamic together, and then how to translate that into our intimate everyday relationships. It's just really hit me in my heart. It was really beautiful to hear. So I appreciate it. With that, how are we feeling? Are we nearing feeling complete? Are we complete?
I feel complete.
Mr. R?
We didn't answer your question about consent and what consent looks like, but I think that the bigger conversation that we had around communication recognizes that consent is not a moment, and it's not a question that we answer when we move away from, but that it's actually the fabric of the thing that we do. That the constant reaffirmation, the constant continued participation is itself the thing which is consent, right? It's not like in that scene between the mommy and her slave, the slave could have gotten up and wandered away and been like, no, I'm not licking your boots. But in their performance of that moment, they reaffirmed their consent to that ongoing relationship and dynamic. And that, to me, is the essence of consent. We can get there through a variety of questions and through examining exactly what it looks like and how it's freely given, or it can be revoked at any time, that it's informed, that it's enthusiastic, and that it's specific. And I also want to note that consent can be nonverbal, that in a lot of queer and gay male spaces, there is a different consent language that is built and that is held within the community, which is different from other communities, and that isn't less good. I think that it comes with other risks that are involved, and the potential for greater misunderstanding because there's potentially less clarity, especially as we grow away from some of these consent models. But that those consent models do still exist, and they are still valuable to continue to remind ourselves of what does consent while cruising look like? What does consent while playing in a dungeon look like? Or at an orgy, what does that look like? And that, again, the continued participation and the space provided for someone to withdraw is an essential part of this, and that's that ongoing continued communication, which serves as the moment-to-moment experience, where consent is sort of the electricity within that thing.
Really beautifully said. And definitely fodder for ongoing, continuous conversation with you. I'm so grateful to have you as part of the circle, to have had you in my life. I've learned so much every time we talk, and I always just have such a warm, fuzzy feeling in my body when we get to connect. So I'm very appreciative of you being here with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
With that, now, do you now feel complete?
Yeah.
Right. Then Tim, will you take us out, please?
Absolutely. Or let's close our eyes, feel our bodies again in our seat and our feet on the floor if they are there. And it is with deep appreciation and gratitude for this shared space, this sacred space of inquiry, exploration, insight, and awareness, that as we leave this circle, I wish everyone listening brotherhood, community, connection, and love. And with these words, our container is open but not broken. Aho.
Aho.